You know, there are days when I genuinely think the US-Mexico border is just some endless talking point for politicians to shout about on television to fill airtime. And then one fine morning, I open a video and see the US Navy stopping cartel boats off the coast of Texas as if they're recreating a real-life version of Call of Duty. That's the moment I have to ask myself, wait, am I watching the news or a film trailer? No, this isn't Hollywood. This is Texas in 2025, and things stopped being merely strange a long time ago. It all starts with the president standing on a stage under a sun hot enough to roast the entire city, Marines standing rigidly behind him, their armor gleaming in the 100-degree Fahrenheit heat. And then he delivers a line that made me rewind the video just to make sure I heard him correctly. We are declaring war on the cartels.
Cartels are waging war in America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels, which we are doing.
Not tighten security, not improve policy, not enhance border measures. No, war. Who would have imagined the day a US president would use that exact word on stage straight into the camera like it was a morning greeting? But he meant it, and the immediate cut that followed proved it wasn't just rhetoric. Marines were standing on the actual border, not in a training exercise. Then the wider picture emerges, a vast force spread from the Rio Grande all the way to the Caribbean. Warships, helicopters, special forces, long-range drones, radar systems, and American troops popping up in places where only cartels used to roam freely. Looking at it, I could only think, so America really has set up camp right at the cartel's spawn point. If you've ever played games, you'll get the feeling instantly. The enemy respawns, only to find someone already waiting at the door. But the scene that made me pause the longest was when the camera returned to the Rio Grande. The water still drifted along quietly, as always, but skimming across it was a Coast Guard boat speeding like a high-speed ferry. On board were officers wearing thick Kevlar vests, probably sweating like waterfalls, yet their faces remained calm. Not groups of people running, not makeshift hiding camps, but a building with a cartel logo plastered across the front as big as a dining table, like the sign of a corner shop. The level of confidence was basically, here we are, we don't bother hiding. A Coast Guard officer pointed across. They're there, they can see us, they've got drones, we've got drones, everyone knows where everyone is. Hearing it made the whole conflict feel bizarrely casual. More like two rival shops competing for customers than two sides of an international border. Then came something I never thought I'd see. Mexicans. Swimming. Yes, you heard that right. Swimming, singing, having BBQs, children running about, families gathering along the riverbank, a place considered a no-go zone just a few years ago because the cartels controlled everything. But to be fair, now they've got high-flying reconnaissance drones, encrypted radios, modern rifles, armored pickup trucks, and even improvised armored vehicles built tough enough to stop bullets. And the worst part? Their tech upgrades so fast that US forces openly admit they're constantly playing catch-up. But then the footage shifts back to the American side, and I realize something. If the cartels are playing the tech game, the US is playing it twice over. Black Hawks circling overhead, masked special forces on the ground, warships offshore, radar sweeping relentlessly, long-range drones launching like an angry swarm, and the highlight F-35 stationed in Puerto Rico. That moment felt like America looking at the cartels and saying, upgrading your tech, are you? Fine, let us upgrade ours. But what breaks the cartels isn't weapons. It isn't warships. It isn't helicopters. It's the money. Until now, the cartel business model was simple. Each migrant pays for 3 attempts. But now things have changed. Migrants who are caught are put on planes and flown to cities hundreds or thousands of kilometers from the border, which means if they want to try again, they must pay extra, 3 times more. If you ask what made the cartels so powerful in the first place, the answer sounds dull but is painfully true. No one stopped them for far too long. When hundreds of thousands of people had to pay for a chance to cross the border, the cartels turned into billion-dollar enterprises. When the law was weak, local officials corrupt, and people desperate to enter the United States, the cartels simply sat back and collected the money. No grand strategy, no armies, just deep pockets. If you think this all ends with American troops on one side of the river and cartels on the other staring at each other, then you haven't seen the next part. Because the real game begins when the United States realizes you can fight cartels with guns, sure, but fighting them by cutting off their cash works 10 times better. You have to understand one thing. For years, cartels made most of their money not from drugs, but from human smuggling. People paid the cartels for a full-service border crossing. 3 attempts, 4th free if you were lucky. Each time they were caught, US officers used to simply send them back to the border, and within minutes they'd return to the exact same spot to try again. Then the new policy arrived. Caught at the border? Forget walking back. You'd be put on a plane and flown straight to a city hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. And once you stood there, exhausted, broke, you'd realize something. Getting back to the border wasn't just hard anymore. It was expensive. So expensive you simply wouldn't do it again. Then the camera returns to the Texas border. A Coast Guard boat speeds past, and I see the officer steering it glance across the river with an expression I can barely describe. But the look of someone who's grown used to seeing the same opponent every day and quietly wonders, so what trick are they trying today? Because that's exactly how it is. Cartels always find a new trick. When land routes close, they switch to the river. But the story doesn't stop at the border. To grasp the full picture, you need to see the U.S. Navy intercepting a small boat off the coast of California. From a distance, it looks like a tourist vessel, but up close it's not. On board are a dozen people packed tightly together, shivering, exhausted, undocumented migrants. Everyone on the boat is transferred onto the patrol vessel, the organizers handcuffed, the migrants taken to a processing center. It all happens quietly, quickly, without chaos, as if the crews had done this 1,000 times, which in reality, they have. And that's when it struck me. Everything at the US-Mexico border now feels less like a war and more like an economic equation being solved through military means. When people no longer have a reason to take risks, the cartels lose customers. They lose revenue. When they lose revenue, smaller gangs abandon them. When those gangs abandon them, territory slips away. And at that point, without a single bullet fired, the cartels become something far less frightening than before. But one big question remains. Is this enough to wipe out the cartels completely? Honestly, not yet. But for the first time in decades, people are seeing something they never dared hope for. The cartels are weakening, genuinely weakening. What's amusing, in the middle of all this tension, is a truth no one says out loud. Americans suddenly realized their border has never actually been run properly. Those years when you saw migrants walking in long lines through gaps in the fence, it turns out it wasn't because it was impossible to stop, but because no one truly tried to stop it. And that's why, when the United States finally tightened things seriously, everything shifted so fast that even those working in the system were stunned. I remember a reporter asking a former border official why illegal crossings used to be so high. He shrugged and replied, "Because we were babysitting, not guarding a border." I laughed and shivered at the same time when I heard that, because it was brutally true. Back then, the border force was effectively an accidental humanitarian organization, handing out milk, changing nappies, taking people to hospitals, then escorting them into America as if it were some kind of aftercare service. Meanwhile, the cartels sat behind the scenes counting the money. Now everything is flipped on its head. Instead of waiting for migrants to arrive so they could be processed, border agents now wait for cartel mistakes. Slowly, everything is shifting from reacting to active hunting. And that is forcing the cartels further south to find new departure points. Which is why we're now seeing the US Navy and Coast Guard intercepting them as far out as the Caribbean Sea. But here's the part that made me think the most. As the United States clamps down to an extreme degree, Mexican civilians have begun seeing the border through a different lens. To them, this area was once a death zone, a place where the cartels set the rules and the police wouldn't dare approach. But now they see American troops, helicopters, drones. Suddenly they feel safer in their own territory. It sounds paradoxical, but it's completely true. There was a segment where a reporter filmed Mexican families having a party right by the riverbank. Music playing, children playing around, parents chatting, a strangely peaceful scene. But to US forces, it's a problem, because within that crowd could be someone live streaming their position to the cartels. There's no sign saying ordinary citizen or cartel spotter. Everything blends together. And that's precisely what makes this conflict so difficult. Not the weapons, not the terrain, but the deliberate blending of society itself. However, even with civilians now gathering by the river, the cartels no longer dare show themselves in broad daylight as they once did. That alone tells you they're under real pressure. This was no longer a matter of gunfights on the border, but a technological confrontation. Radar, drones, data analysis, AI tracking vessel movements. Look at the operational maps, and it's obvious. The cartels have no place that is clearly safe anymore. Every location carries the risk of detection, and for an organization built on operating in the shadows, being dragged into the light is a true nightmare. But the most striking part is the change in the rules. Previously, the cartels only had to avoid Mexican police. Now they must avoid US radar, US drones, US warships, US helicopters, and even F-35s circling overhead. It's not an exaggeration. There really are F-35s on surveillance duty. And when you bring a stealth fighter into a conflict where the other side is using wooden boats and old radios, you understand the two sides are operating in entirely different universes. And what happens when the incentive disappears? The number of migrants dropped to 4,600 in July, the lowest in recent history, from 56,000 down to 4,600. That figure says more than any speech ever could. It says the cartels are not just being attacked, they're being hit exactly where they're weakest. I thought about that while watching the U.S. Coast Guard intercept a small boat off San Diego. On board were migrants sitting silently, eyes tired, saying nothing. No shouting, no running, no resistance, just a quiet resignation. And behind them, the two organizers were handcuffed. No gunfire, no dramatic pursuit, no Hollywood chase. Just a small boat drifting calmly, stopped by a force superior in every respect. That moment made me think of something few people say aloud. This conflict isn't about defeating the cartels, but about breaking a cycle that has lasted far too long. A cycle of poverty, exploitation, and desperation. When people stop being lured, the cartels lose customers. When they lose customers, they lose money. When they lose money, they lose power. And when they lose power, they lose the aura of invincibility they once built on fear. And I suppose that's enough to close out a rather chaotic day. If you asked me how I feel about all this, I'd simply say, yes, it's absolutely mad, but that's America for you. A place where you can turn on the TV and see the Navy stopping cartels at sea, Marines standing in the middle of Texas, Mexicans swimming in the Rio Grande, and a president declaring war on the cartels all in the same week.
To wage war on the cartels, which we are doing.
Thank you for watching until the end, and hey, whether you're in Texas, New York, or on the other side of the world, remember this: the world changes faster than we think. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications while you're at it. Because if you miss the next video, that'd be a real shame. Thanks for staying with me until the end. See you in the next one.